Hello and welcome. Today we are going to talk about the Chinese international relations paradigm, and we are speaking to Keindo, senior fellow at Pangol Institute. So I will jump into the questions and ask this. What do you think about Chinese international relations, and how China's interpretation of international relations diverge from the Western ones, liberalism and realism? From your perspective, how does these differ?
Thank you for having me. It's an important topic. I know a lot of people are paying attention to how China behaves itself internationally, given the weight of its economy, and as well as technological prowess in power into this world. I would say China's foreign policy principle is very much different from the Western practice. Usually we see Western liberalism or Western realism. If you look at the realism, for example, it often sees the international relations is conflict-driven, because it's largely, I would say, in the West, it's based on individualism. Everybody is for its rights. Everybody is for to fight for its own rights and interests. And then it's kind of similar to nations. So every nation has to fight for itself. So naturally, there will be confrontation. That will be, bipolar. It's like a binary relationship. It's A versus B. It tends to be confrontational in terms of the relationship. If you look at the Western liberalism, for example, they stress very much about the values, so-called universal values, Western style democracy, Western style freedom, human rights, etc. If there's any nation that is not up to the standard of the liberal-minded people, for example, they would say, the country A or country B, there's a lack of human rights protection. Protection records is poor. There's a lack of freedom. There's a lack of democracy. So somehow we need to intervene to have a regime change, to topple the government, have a new government. Usually, the new government will be friendly to the US, for example, or to the West. But Chinese foreign policy principle is very different from that. The Chinese side stress very much of sovereignty, stress very much about being equal and being, respectful of each other. It has nothing to do with the size of the nation or the power of a nation. So, whether you are powerful or weak, whether you are large or small, we are equal. One example I can give is that, for smaller nations, I would say in terms of size, either they are from the South Pacific Islands or from one of the African nations, for example, if they arrive in Beijing, yes, they will secure a meeting with Xi Jinping for sure. However busy Mr. Xi is, and he will manage time to take care of his guests, because he sees that that's the equal of me. I need to meet that. And also, I would say very different from the Western practice, is China dislike the domestic intervention of another country, because for the Chinese people, we believe every country is different, every nation is different. They have their own cultural background, they have their own traditions, they have their own practices. So they do things different from another country. So other country, we don't think other country, they are qualified or they are in the position to lecture another country in terms of how to develop themselves. Yes, you're welcome to give suggestions. You're welcome to provide advice. But, we don't like being lectured. I don't think any country like being lectured. So to sum up, I would say Chinese, foreign policy stresses very much about sovereignty, no domestic interference, stress very much about the mutual respect and equal footing. Every nation conduct business on equal footing. And the Chinese stress very much about, cooperation rather than confrontation among nations. I would say in general, that's the Chinese principle for foreign policy.
So you spoke about Xi Jinping and his policies. So how do you think that China's win-win policy is working? And what is community of shared future in Chinese foreign policy? How civilization plays a role in Chinese foreign policy?
Good questions. I think fundamentally, for every nation, we firmly believe the practice of their foreign policy usually comes from their own belief in terms of their tradition, culture, in terms of who they are. So this is deeply rooted or ingrained in their own traditions or cultures. So for the Chinese, it's the same. In China is in terms of size. China is a large country too. In addition to population, so we have this traditionally this idea of China is surrounded by seas. China is all the Chinese live under the same sky. So we have this idea of like under the heaven we are brothers and sisters. Under the heaven we are a big family, and we need to treat each other with respect, equality, and also being honest. And if that's the case, and then there's harmony. That does not mean we don't have differences, but I would say the ideological situation or ideal situation for the Chinese foreign policy or understanding is like harmony with differences, or differences in harmony, diversity in harmony. At the end of the day, there is a harmonious society, a harmonious relationship among nations. At the same time, we maintain our unique identity. We are different from each other, but at the same time, we deal with each other on equal footing with due respect and treat each other nicely and cooperate with each other in a way that is win-win, rather than we confront each other or we fight each other. We don't think that's beneficial to any side of the relationship. So that's the idea, I think, community of a shared future comes from. That is, we have a similar, and we will have a future in the future where we all are part of their future. So in that way, we are all closely connected. I think the best example probably is a climate change, because no country or no individuals can escape from the effects of climate change if we don't act now, if we don't act in an urgent manner. And also it's like a transactional crimes, for example. It needs cooperation of different nations, and also for the benefits of everybody. We need to work together. And also it's like fighting virus, that's national borders. So we need to work with each other to fight those, let's say, I would say negative factors, negative elements, across borders. So that's probably the best examples to understand the community of a shared future.
So please stay with us, and we will be back in 1 or 2 minutes after playing this clip. Thank you for staying with us, and we are now back to Kyindo, a senior fellow at Pangol Institute, and we are continuing our speech and conversation about the Chinese foreign policy in the Middle East. So, sir, how do you think that Xi Jinping's foreign policy differs from his predecessors? And is it different, or China has a long-term strategy and is trying to enforce that without being the person important?
If you look at the U.S. view of China, there's a book written by a U.S. scholar. They call it the marathon, like the China's scheme of like 100 years to conquer the world. No, it's not the case, of course. When Chinese people see that kind of that kind of idea, we just laugh at that because 100 years ago it's a different governments, which was weak, which was bullied by Western powers, which was part of we call it 100 years of humiliation at that time. The China we are talking, or the current government we are talking, was founded in 1949. And since 1978, China started this opening up and reform. So we are witnessing sea changes in the country, so-called the rise of China, of course. And then, of course, under the previous governments, there's one principle. A former leader, Deng Xiaoping, said, they call it like keep a low profile. And that is, I think what he meant is like, let's focus on economic construction. Let's try to create a better international environment, the environment of peace and stability, especially surrounding China, so we can focus on economic matters. And then, of course, it was the turn of President Xi, who came to office basically 2012, 2013. And of course, we see many people will see presidency is different from his predecessors. Of course, a different person, right? Different personality, a different understanding of issues, I would say. But in general, obviously the Chinese policies, we see a continuity from previous government. For example, opening up and reform that continued. And also, if you look at some of the, people mentioned about institutions created by the Chinese side, for example, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, previously we called it Shanghai Five, that was created way before President Xi came to took office. And so, of course, under President Xi, he's, people may say he's, let's say, in terms of policy making, he's proactive domestically and internationally. And of course, people are more familiar with, probably Chinese foreign policy, for people from other countries. For example, he has initiatives, Belt and Road initiatives, well known around the world. He also proposed several other initiatives, very important ideas in terms of the global governance. For example, Global Development Initiative, which focuses on development, Global Security Initiative, which basically said that, yes, you care about your own national security, but also you should take into consideration of the security of another country. And also Global Civilizational Initiative, and also recent one is the Global Governance Initiative. And of course, with AIIB, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, very important financial institution, sort of similar to World Bank or IMF. And we have the new development bank, all created during the time of presidency. So in that sense, I would say the Chinese side is very much in the mode of help reform the global governance, because we all know that developing countries, despite their economic growth of China, India, for example, but their say in international financial institutions like IMF, they are very much limited because of the opposition from Washington, especially from the Congress. So that's why we see the creation of those institutions, and also I would say BRICS, BRICS grouping of developing nations from global South. So because you're borrowing a term from the West, with the rise of the West, I would say the international landscape has been under change, has been ongoing changes, and unfortunately, the global institution they failed to catch up with those changes, and so there are some institutions created with the idea from China. China played an important role, but China is not trying to have a different, let's say, international order or creating these institutions against the U.S. or against the West. China wants to play a role that is to reform the global governance, to make it fairer, to make it more equitable to the global
sorry
South.
For me cutting in. So you talked about the Belt and Road Initiative, and you are talking about that China doesn't want to reestablish the global order. But many people in the West say that this initiative is aimed at Chinese imperialism, and they say that China is trying to push countries in a debt trap, and they want to borrow money from China, and China lends them money to gain influence in their countries. How do you assess these remarks by Westerners? Do you think that they are right about this, or no, this is not the case?
The short answer is, of course, it's not the case. If that's the case, you wouldn't find an increasing number for developing countries and international institutions signing up to the Belt and Road Initiative. For example, right now, I think the number is like more than 150 countries and regions and also international institutions signing up to a Belt and Road Initiative. I mean, the number itself say a lot about success or failure of this initiative, or why it's so popular with especially the global South, I would say. And secondly, the idea of how bad or how negative the BRI is. This kind of accusation mostly come from the United States. Because the U.S., remember, for people who are not familiar with that, the U.S. actually was the first country to propose the new Silk Road running through Central Asia. That's promoted by the U.S. But I think Western countries has a problem. That is, they can propose, they can talk, but usually implementation is a problem. Enforcement is a problem. There's no follow-up implementation. So the Chinese side, in a sense, you can say Chinese side, that's a good idea, let's have more connectivity or better connectivity within China and also with other countries, so we can do business with more countries. Mm-hmm. And also remember, BRI firstly focused very much on infrastructure, road, highways, ports, airports, bridges, etc. Why? Because it comes from the Chinese experience. In China, there's a saying, if you want to get rich, build a road, because we believe connectivity helps with economic construction. So that's very, I would say, very natural, very simple idea, why there is Belt and Road Initiative in the first place. And also, obviously, part of the background is from the Asian China. I remember Asian China, there is old Silk and road, Silk Road from China to European countries, for example, with China, with the tea as the major product at that time. And then now, why there's an attack from Washington? For example, a couple of years ago, there's the U.S. Congress. I would say they allocated a special amount of money to award those so-called NGOs or individuals or journalists to pick up negative stories about the BRI. Well, they are not building anything. They are very good at attacking BRI to make a bad name, about BRI. I think exactly because BRI is popular with global South countries. That's why Washington is not happy with that. And lastly, I would say, whether a country sees BRI negatively or positively is up to that government. Remember, for example, countries like Kenya, like Zambia, or like Uganda, it's up to them to make the decision. In the West, they can't wait and they make decisions for those countries. Say, oh, don't do that because it's bad. It's somehow like, developing countries are inferior to Washington. Washington, intellectually, the superior to countries from the global South. This is a kind of like a colonial practice. Somehow I have to make a decision for you. You cannot make decisions for yourself because you are not independent enough intellectually. This is a humiliation for developing countries.
Yes.
This is obviously there's a lack of respect, to say the least, for developing countries to make a decision for themselves rather than decision made in the West.
Yes. So you talked about the global South, and the Middle Eastern countries are from that criteria and fill that criteria. So what do you think about the Middle Eastern countries, the Persian Gulf countries, and Iran especially? How and what is the significance of the Middle Eastern countries? Do you think that China is lying heavily on these countries, or no? It's not important for China. What about the relation between these countries and China, and how China differs its partners? For example, do you think that Iran is important enough for China to confront the Western people, or no?
Good question. I think overall, the Middle East as a region is critically important to China, partly because this region is rich in energy resources, oil and gas, for example, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other countries. And China is a country which relies heavily on import of oil and gas in terms of energy consumption. And as an important power of the world, economic power of the world, I would say energy security is critically important to China. So China, I would say partly that explains why China cherishes so much about its relationship with Iran, its relationship with Saudi Arabia, and with countries in the region in general. And secondly, I would say, as we talked about already, BRI is more about connectivity, with the connectivity of infrastructure, road, bridges that connects the resources with the ports, for example, connects China with Iran, connects China with Saudi Arabia, for example. I think that, of course, it provides, I would say, safe or alternative choices for China in terms of safe passage. For example, if we, let's say, import oil and gas from Iran via a land route through Central Asia from Iran to China. In that way, we will bypass several maritime choke points under control of Washington. I mean, you have to prepare for the worst. In the worst scenario, if there's a military confrontation, in particular between Beijing and Washington, China has to take that into consideration to make sure there will be safe, secure supply of energies from this region, from Iran and Saudi Arabia, for example. Of course, that's the consideration. I think every country should take that into consideration. So is China. And also, I would say, if you look at Iran in particular, Iran is an independent nation, which is very independent in terms of sovereignty, in terms of its, it's a great nation with a long history, with its own civilization. China respects Iran and respects the Iranian people very much. We have enjoyed a stable, a long-term relationship with Iran and with the Iranian people. And so I think China sees Iran as an important part of a Belt and Road Initiative, especially in this region, through the point of energy security and also through the point of infrastructure construction. China has invested heavily in Iran in terms of building road and ports, for example. And also, I think, China is working with Iran, with Russia, for example. We have a regular, I would say, military drill targeting, terror activities. So all those common interests bring China and Iran closer, bring the two countries together. I would say all those activities, they are laying a foundation for more development between the two countries, and also for more development between China and this region.
So I have two questions for you. Iran is under heavy sanctions by the United States, and now the snapback mechanism have put more pressure on Iran, and the United Nations wants Iran to be sanctioned, not China and Russia actually. But what do you think? Will China continue trading with Iran? Will there be economic and commercial trade between the two countries, or will China stop trading with Iran and leave Iran in the cold in front of these kinds of sanctions? That is the first question. And the second question is about this. Do you think that China will choose a side if a renewed tension rises up in the Middle East? For example, Israel attacking Iran again. Will China choose sides, or no, like the other war in June, it will just condemn Israeli attacks and will call for calmness and such things? What do you think?
That's a good question. That's also a challenging question. I would say I call it challenging because it's challenging for both China and Iran, and also for this entire region. Let me answer your second question first. If you look at I would say the commentary or the news coverage in China about Israel's strike on Iran, on the Iranian nuclear sites, and other, the capital city, for example, I would say the Chinese commentators, political analysts are very much critical of Israelis because obviously that's an action in violation of UN Charter. You are attacking a sovereign nation without any proper reason or proper excuse. And also, of course, and that's without any authorization from the UN Security Council. And Israeli attacks was assisted by the United States UN Security Council member, actually. So that makes things even worse. So that's a serious, very grave violation of UN principles and charters. What's unfortunate is that the European nations, they failed to criticize, and they failed to be critical of the US. They failed to act like, they would be if things happened in a different way. They would probably very much critical of Iran if we have a different format there. So China, I would say China is very consistent in terms of upholding the principles of the UN, like respecting sovereignty of another nation. I think China made that very clear. And also, because of that, I would say relationship with Israel has worsened. The Israelis joined the US, for example, in the recent UN resolution to condemn China, altogether 15 countries, to condemn China on China's Xinjiang. They call it, there's a human rights problem. People would laugh at that. Look at what Israel has done to residents in Gaza. I mean, 60 or 70,000 civilians were killed. People call that genocide. Massive killing, atrocity there. And yet, they have this audacity to criticize China for human rights record in Xinjiang, which is a prosperous region of China. So you see, they are calling the black white right now. So they are trying to rewrite history. This is, I would say, intolerable. And both China and Iran and other countries, we should speak up for the truth. We should speak up for the principle and for justice. And China is doing that at the expense of its relationship with Israel. China does not want to damage relationship with any other partners or countries, but China, thinks principles matters much more than, say, in that sense, relationship with a particular country here. We have to respect, that kind of principle, because that's the foundation for maintaining peace and stability in this region among nations. So that's one thing. And you also mentioned about whether China will. I think people would say, why don't China provide weapons to Iran, to protect itself? I would say, that's an interesting question. Long term, we don't know what will happen. But if you look at what happened, say during this brief war between Pakistan and India, Pakistan has a system, I would say, imported from China in terms of helicopter, in terms of radar system, and which worked effectively and which is proved to be superior, against the Western weapons there. So at least in terms of defense, I think that's not something unthinkable to protect Iran, for example. Instead of we're not talking about we have a military power to attack or to bully other countries. What about protecting ourselves from being offended, from being attacked? That's not unthinkable. And also, of course, it's a long-term, it's about bilateral relationship, it's about probably closer cooperation between the two countries, etc. There's a lot of factors. And secondly, if you look at this region, I think China, for its own sake, China pressures stability and peace in this region. China mediated this foreign relationship of this foreign affairs rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. China benefits from a better relationship between Iran and its neighbors. China benefited from peace and stability because without peace and stability, how can we implement this Belt and Road Initiative? How can we have a community of a shared future? It's impossible. So China is also, remember, the country which benefits, probably one of the countries which benefits the most from trade and investment. So China would very much to have this idea of globalization to continue, to do more trade, to do more investment, to have all countries focus on business rather than military confrontation, rather than bullying other countries. Yes. So that's the Chinese ultimate goal in this region: peace and stability.
So what about the sanctions? Will it affect the bilateral ties or no? China will continue to trade with Iran.
Yes and no. I would say yes, because those sanctions, they are having an impact on Chinese institutions, on Chinese companies. Because, for example, the Chinese banks, especially those 4 large state-owned banks, if they are doing business with Iran, and the U.S. will impose sanctions on them because of their exposure to New York, this financial market. So that will make them, let's say, enabled to do business around the world. So that's real. We have to admit that. I would say also no. I'm saying no because there are other ways, other means to do business without being hurt or without being affected by the U.S. sanctions, which is, by the way, illegitimate, illegal, and without UN authorization. I want to stress on that because some people would say, oh, the sanctions are from the UN, so it is illegal. Every country should follow those rules. No, it's not the case. And so in that sense, I would say we do have means, to protect ourselves, protect China, protect Iran. Well, we continue our business. For example, we continue to purchase oil and gas from Iran by some Chinese institutions, Chinese companies. For example, in terms of settlement, we can settle the trade through Chinese yuan. And just as an example, to avoid our reliance on the use of US dollar, to reduce our exposure to this US financial system, I think because of US frequent sanctions on other countries, they are digging a hole for themselves. They are forcing other countries, very important countries like China, like Iran, like Russia, and other countries to reduce their reliance, reduce their use of US dollar. As a result, the US is weakening itself financially. I'm not sure, how, any country would do that. But yes, they are doing that. They are forcing us to use our own currency to reduce our use of US dollar, our exposure of US dollar. I mean, it takes time, but we will see. So ultimately, we will build a system of our own. We can do business without any exposure to the US, whatever sanctions, we don't care that much.
Thank you. It was a great pleasure to talk with you, and it was very good and insightful conversation, and I hope that soon we can talk again. We had Kyindo, Senior Fellow at Pangol Institute, and we are covering right now the Chinese foreign policy in the Middle East, and we talked about Iran's foreign policy and the Chinese foreign policy in the Middle East and its relations with the regional countries, including Iran, Saudi Arabia, and other Middle Eastern countries. And we hope that we will see you soon again. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
It was very great. It was very great. I will.
All right.
It was really good. I will create a link and send it to you after being edited. This will be edited and it will be published in our website. And also, it was people were watching it online. People were
watching.
Thank you. Yes.
That's
thank
great.
you.
That's
it
great.
Was great.
Yeah.
It was an honor. Thank you.
Pleasure is mine. I think it's good to talk to you and to help other people, your listeners, your viewers understand better about our relationship.
Our audience is mainly from the think tanks, and they are scholars, and they are eager to know the Chinese perspective about the foreign policy and the Middle East and everything that relates to China.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Goodbye.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.